As the Israelites stand weeping at the entrance of their tents, hungry for meat and fed up with the manna in this week's Torah portion, God is angry, and Moses' distress gives rise to a heartbreaking conversation overheard by us, the listeners. "Why have you dealt ill with your servant?" says Moses. "And why have I not enjoyed your favor, that you have laid the burden of all this people upon me? Did I conceive all this people? Did I give birth to them, that you should say to me, 'Carry them in your bosom, kasher yisa ha'omein et hayonek,' as a nurse carries an infant to the land that you have promised?" Moses refers to himself as Omein, an extraordinary image. What does it mean? And what resonance does it have for us today? The word comes from the three-letter root, Aleph, Mem, Nun, which may ring a bell in other contexts. But before we get there, let us examine it in the form it appears in our parashah. It's in the present tense, or to use the classical biblical term, a participle form, and that means it can have a verbal meaning or it can be a noun. Seeing it in other contexts may help us understand its meaning. In 2 Samuel, we find it in its feminine form, Omenet. Here we learn that Jonathan, the son of King Saul and a great friend of David, had a son called Ishbosheth, whose nurse had fallen while fleeing in haste, having heard of the deaths of his father and grandfather. And that word for nurse is Omenet. At 5 years old, little Ishbosheth was left disabled by his nurse's fall. This is a little aside, really, and he's described as having nechei raglayim, literally his feet are smitten. But the Omenet, we must assume that this royal prince, Ishbosheth, had a nanny or nursemaid who looked after him while his parents attended to matters of state. In the book of Esther, Mordecai is described as an Omein to his cousin Esther, who is an orphan. It may mean he is her foster father, or that he adopted her, or that he simply raised her and provided her with a home. In the book of Ruth, another example, after Ruth has given birth to her son Obed, we are told rather strangely that Naomi, the baby's grandmother, becomes the child's Omenet. Did she adopt her grandson? Did she become his foster mother? Did she nurse him? Did she raise him rather than his biological mother? The word raises many unanswerable questions. Perhaps the only thing we can say is that because the marriage of Ruth and Boaz in a way fulfills the ancient Jewish law of Yibum, for which there is no translation, whereby a relative, usually an unmarried brother-in-law, marries his childless sister-in-law in order to raise up a child in the dead man's name, it makes some biblical sense that the son, Obed, belongs in some way to Naomi or to the family of Naomi. But I'm not sure I'm wholly convinced. But to return to our verse in Numbers, what does Moses mean when he refers to himself as an Omein? The medieval commentators have something to say on this. Ibn Ezra notes Moses' distress and that he makes this outburst in a moment of haste. Did I conceive them means, am I their mother? Did I give birth to them? He understands in the old-fashioned sense of beget, am I their father? In other words, at that moment of stress, he felt he was both a mother and father to the people, with everything that is implied. Nachmanides adds to this. The word omein, he says, is semantically feminine, but grammatically masculine. In other words, he sees the word as signifying a female role, the nurse, the nursemaid, the caregiver, because this role is not likely to be a male one in 13th century Catalonia. So like Ibn Ezra, he sees it referring both to the mother and the father. But he adds, in my opinion, the entire metaphor refers to a child's mother. A woman will put up with a great deal of pain raising children when she remembers how much she has already suffered with them, from birth, from the womb, from conception. The text, says Nachmanides, uses the masculine form for nurse, simply because Moses was, after all, a male and not a female. I am not a scholar of modern gender studies on the Bible, but it might be worth pointing out that a few verses later, as Moses tells God that he cannot carry the people by himself, it is too much for him, he addresses God not with the masculine pronoun atah, you, but in the feminine form of the Hebrew word at. One commentator picks this up and says Moses was so distressed he couldn't get out the last syllable. Ve'im kacha at asali, if you would deal thus with me, kill me rather, I beg you. Yes, he is distressed, but perhaps because he feels profoundly and viscerally the pain of a mother who conceives, gives birth, and must care for her child, Moses appeals to God, not as a father, but as a mother. You as a mother, he says, surely know that I've reached the end of my tether with this people. But to return to the word omein, which I said in another context and slightly different form, might ring a few bells for us. If it sounds like the Ashkenazi pronunciation for amen, omein, then you are not far wrong. It comes from the verbal root aman, which means to confirm, to support, to be made firm or lasting, to trust and believe. And it is this root that also gives us the words emunah, faithfulness, and emet, truth. Amen, the word we recite at the end of a blessing or prayer, really means something like, I confirm the truth of what I have heard. So the omein or omenet is the caregiver, the person who raises a child, who becomes an adoptive parent or foster parent, the guardian of a child. But they are also the individuals who keep faith with the person they are caring for. They are guided by the values of steadfastness and faithfulness, by reliability and truth. They give support and nourishment and love. They ensure the security of the individual they are caring for. All these meanings are embedded in this single word, omein or omenet. It is easy to forget the individual omanim and omanot who give care to family members or to those they work for. Over the years, I have seen so many individuals who give that reliable and faithful, loving, respectful and dignified care to the people they are looking after. It is rooted in a relationship of trust and belief. The cared for believes they will be looked after, and trusts in the person who is caring for them, while the carer seeks the comfort, well-being, and dignity of the person they are looking after. It is not that Moses does not understand the complaints and weeping of the Israelite people. On the contrary, as an Omein, he understands and empathizes too readily. He himself is raw and distressed, and recognizes that he has reached a limitation in his care of the people, hence the need for more help, for leaders to be appointed. At that moment, he feels the pain of the people and loses the boundaries that allow him to take a step back to offer care and leadership without feeling engulfed by his own responsibilities. He is physically present, but his distress removes him from being emotionally present with them. There are so many lessons to be drawn from this one word, and so much to say about care, physical, spiritual, emotional, and pastoral. I have seen with my own eyes over this past year, and just in these last few days, how much carers give of themselves, family members, doctors, nurses, paramedics, auxiliary staff in hospitals, care and residential home staff, carers who go into people's homes, and many, many others whose daily task it is to provide that trustworthy, reliable, established, supportive, and loving relationship to those they care for. May we emulate them by being faithful and selfless, and ensure that their roles are rewarded and valued for the self-sacrificing work they undertake. Amen.